What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you today on the channel an update to my Evil Eye Yubel deck profile for the post Legacy of Destruction format. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh content mainly focused around rogue and casual decks alike. If that's the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of my uploads. We are currently working our way to 2,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. You do not want to miss out on the absolute amazing and cool content that I have, so make sure that you're subscribed, like the video, comment down below on what you think. Now, to the profile. Obviously, the reason why everyone's here. I feel like I'm the only person playing Evil Eyes with the Yubel support. Maybe not the only person, but at least the one, broadcasting it and making videos based around it. I think that the Evil Eye package or engine is really, really versatile and plays so nicely into the Yubel archetype, and it definitely gives the deck a lot more push and resiliency to certain hand traps, and even grants Yubel negates that Yubel simply doesn't have, like the ability to negate spells and traps, the ability to negate monsters, for example. It just gives the deck a lot more push, and I am having the absolute best time of my life with it. I've taken it to 4 locals already, and the most recent locals that I took this exact list to, I actually placed second at that local. So this list is not any kind of slouch. It definitely packs one heck of a punch, and I've literally tested this deck so much and optimized the crap out of it so I could bring you guys this really amazing deck profile for the channel today. So with that being said, you know how we do here. We're going to start off with the monster lineup first. Now, one thing I will preface about this deck is that it is bigger because I had to accommodate the Evil Eye cards into it. So the only downsides I would say this deck list actually has is the fact that you're not able to play as much non-engine as you would like. And there's additional bricks or garnets, I would say, that you don't really want to draw, but my solution to that was to play a bigger deck. So this particular list is actually 48 cards. Now I know that sounds really insane, but let me tell you, it's extremely consistent. I've taken this, like I said, to 4 different locals, and I've placed really, really well at all of those locals, and then the last one that I went to actually ended up taking second place. My only loss being to Pure Snake Eye, which was really cracked. And it's not like I was playing against bad decks. I mean, all the locals that I've gone to, I've played against Voiceless, I've played against Tenpai Dragon, I've played against Purely, Cash Tira, I played the mirror match, which actually the Evil Eye cards really carried in the mirror against another Yubel deck, and I'll explain why as we talk about the list. But this list is absolutely incredible. Like I said, 48 cards. So to start things off, we're playing 3 copies of Surzeal, Watcher of the Evil Eye. Level 4 Dark Fiend, and upon normal summon, it lets you add an Evil Eye card from the deck to your hand, except himself. Now, this is generally going to be what your starter is for this deck. I know, obviously, the Yubel variant does play the Samsara Lotus, which we're also playing, and while that card is the starter, depending on how you open, generally, we're always going to prioritize getting to Surzeal first, just because I think Surzeal has a lot more push and doesn't lose as hard to hand traps in the way that Lotus would. If they Ash Blossom its effect, for example, you end up going pretty neg most of the time. Whereas if they Ash to Surzeal, you at least still keep a body on the field to keep trying to extend with, which I like. So, Rhoda on summon. Then, for those of you unfamiliar with Evil Eyes, their gimmick is that they play with this card called Evil Eye of Selene, which is a equipped spell. And while he's equipped with Evil Eye of Selene, he has a quick effect where he can target a special summon monster the opponent controls and destroy it. Which is really, really cool. Granting, targeted removal on your opponent's side of the field is always a really good benefit. However, the Evil Eyes have what I like to call a punishment kind of effect, or a repercussion of you using their particular effects while equipped, and that's during the next standby phase. After this effect was activated, you have to mandatory destroy 1 card you control. Now, looking at this, you would think, oh, that kind of sucks. However, when you combine that drawback, or whatever you want to call it, with Yubel, that drawback ends up turning into a plus. If you use that effect to start destroying your own Yubel monsters, you end up getting free resources left and right. It's really, really powerful. So I really do like the Evil Eye package in Yubel. So obviously 3 Surzeal is definitely a must. Up next is just 2 copies of Basil Triss, Familiar the Evil Eye. This card is an extender from the hand or the graveyard. As a quick effect, as long as you control an Evil Eye monster, it can special itself, but banish it when it leaves the field. And if that wasn't crazy enough, during your opponent's turn, as an additional quick effect, he allows you to link summon as a quick effect into an Evil Eye link using monsters you control as material, and you also get the benefit of using Evil Eye equips you control as link material as if they were monsters. So think of this card like an archetypal IP Masquerena, just allowing you to quick link on your opponent's turn into your Evil Eye link monsters, which is just so strong. This card packs one heck of a punch, and people just don't see it coming. It's a really insane extender for the deck, and that actually rounds out the Evil Eye monsters that we're running. Up now, we're going to talk about the Yubel monsters, of which we do play 3 Spirit of Yubel. Obviously, for those Yubel connoisseurs, you already know this card is the nuts. Not only does it function like a pseudo hand trap in the hand, if your opponent declares an attack, it can special itself. When it is special summoned, you can either add to your hand or set a spell trap from deck that mentions Yubel. He can't be killed by battle. Also, you take no battle damage from battles involving it. And if it's destroyed by any means, it can special summon a Yubel, the original Yubel, from basically anywhere. Hand, deck, graveyard, or even banishment, which is just absolutely nuts. So you definitely want to max out on 3 copies of Spirit of Yubel. Really amazing retrain of the iconic Yubel monster. Then we play 2 copies of the original Yubel herself. Now these are a bit of a brick or garnet, as you'd call. You don't really want to open with them, but the deck does have ways to like make it so it doesn't just suck if you do open it. It's not ideal, but you can still get by. The reason why we play 2 is because you always want to have an additional copy, so when you make your rank 10 plays, you still have an additional Yubel that Spirit can float into, in case your one of Yubel is tucked under an Xyz monster as material, which we'll go into further detail when we talk about the extra deck. But 2 Yubel, again, can't be destroyed by battle. You take no battle damage from attacks involving it, and then before damage calculation, if this face-up attack position card is targeted for an attack, you get to inflict damage to your opponent equal to that attacking monster's attack. So you burn your opponent for the attack of what they're using to battle into the Yubel. And then Yubel also has a maintenance cost during your end phase mandatory. She has to either tribute one other monster or destroy herself. Then when she is destroyed, except by her own effect, you can special summon a Yubel Terror Incarnate from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So Terror Incarnate is Yubel's next form, which I have here. This is a one of. Now this is more of a brick than actually hard opening the original Yubel, which is why we just play one of this one. Basically the same effect. It cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned by Yubel, and it cannot be destroyed by battle as well. And we do not take battles from attacks involving it. Just like Yubel, before damage calculation, if this face-up attack position card is targeted for an attack, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attacking monster's attack. So basically, you know, Yubel 2.0. However, during the your end phase, instead of having the maintenance cost of tributing a monster or self-destructing it, the Terror Incarnate basically destroys all other monsters on the field. And this is a mandatory effect, so it's like a dark hole on legs, and it's just extremely difficult to out. Now, if this card is destroyed, there's a third form that you can float into. However, for the purposes of this particular list, I'm choosing not to run the Ultimate Nightmare, as it's called, because I just feel like that card is just a straight brick. You might be able to get away with playing it once we get the new fusion monster, Phantom of Yubel, which as of right now, we really have no idea when it's coming, because Konami hasn't officially announced what set that's going to be in. Right now, all we can do is speculate and guess that it's maybe coming in the next Battles of Legends set for us TCG players, but until we get that card, I don't think playing the third form is worth it in the main deck, because it's just a brick, in my honest opinion. So that is our Yubel ratio. Now, up next, brand new out of Legacy of Destruction, we do have 3 copies of the Gruesome Grave Squirmer. This is a level 1 Dark Fiend, and it's basically a really crazy extender, almost like Shavara in Unchained, where if you control a Fiend monster, quick effect, you could special summon this card from your hand. Then you can, as an optional effect, destroy a Yubel or a monster that mentions it. Keep in mind, the Gruesome Grave Squirmer can actually destroy itself. I don't know what scenarios you'd want to do that, but it can with its own effect, which I thought was kind of cool. The reason why I like this card at 3 specifically is because our normal summon in this deck happens to be Surzeal, Watcher of the Evil Eye. So if you normal summon the Surzeal, you can use Gruesome as an extender, using Surzeal plus Gruesome to link off into like a Gorgon, for example, the Evil Eye Link 2, and then as long as you put Gruesome in Grave, he's got a graveyard effect where he can banish himself to special summon a Fiend monster from your hand or graveyard that has 0 attack and defense, which could be any of your Yubels except Terror Incarnate, because Grave Squirmer does not ignore conditions, or it could be the Samsara D Lotus, which we'll talk about shortly. And that's how you actually bridge your Evil Eye and your Yubel lines together, because I know Samsara D Lotus also is a monster that requires the normal summon usually. But 3 Squirmer is just insane. Not only does Squirmer, just acting as a free Fiend extender, allows you to make Gorgon without having to burn your Basiltrist. That way you can keep Gorgon on field and use Basiltrist in the opponent's turn to link into the Evil Eye Link 3 Zerziel, which I think is really crazy. So 3 copies of Infernal Squirmer. I wouldn't recommend playing any less, at least for this variant. I know it's a little unique because most players aren't choosing to play with Evil Eyes, but I am. Then up next we have 2 Samsara D Lotus. I'm not maxing out on this, even though it is a starter for the deck, simply because we would rather open up Zerziel. I feel like you get much further with Zerziel than opening with Lotus, and Zerziel is a lot more resilient to hand traps than Lotus is. Like I said, if Lotus gets ashed, depending on how your hand looks, you're usually just passing the turn back to your opponent, which is something that I really didn't want. So I like the fact that, like, you know, Zerziel doesn't have to resolve necessarily. You still keep a body on the board to make link plays with, which I think is really, really cool. Plus, not to mention the cards that Zerziel can search actually give this deck a much higher ceiling, in my opinion, and we'll talk about that when we do get to the spells and traps. But Samsara D Lotus, basically you contribute it, and then it allows you to special summon a Yubel monster from your deck, which is really nice. Generally, you're going to be summoning Spirit of Yubel with that. Then, during your opponent's turn, when a monster effect is activated while you control a Yubel monster, quick effect, you contribute this card, and the activated effect becomes destroy 1 Yubel monster on the field. So it takes an opponent's effects and makes it something else. It doesn't negate that effect, it just changes what the effect is. Kind of similar to the Dark World fusion monster, the Grapha Overlord of Dark World, from the Dark World structure deck that just came out. So really cool there. One thing I did find out is that if you change the effect of an opponent's monster, it doesn't actually affect the monster itself, which means that in the Tenpai matchup, when they have Sangan summoning on their field, if they summon like Pydra and attempt to use the effect to search for a spell trap, you can use D Lotus to just make that effect destroy a Yubel on the field. And even if they have Sangan Kaiman out, the field spell, that doesn't prevent Lotus from changing their card's effect, which is really crazy. Then, additional effect on this card during your end phase, if you control a Yubel and this card's in the grave, and you have to control Yubel specifically, the original Yubel, you can either add this card to your hand or special summon it, which is really cool. So just 2 Lotus. It's worked out fine in this variant since, like, again, you're usually prioritizing the normal summon to Zerziel specifically. Then moving on, a little bit of a hot take here, and I know some of you guys might have some things to say about this, but I'm choosing to main deck 3 Skullmeisters as one of my hand traps of choice in this list. Reason being is that Skullmeister has a lot of application in this format. There's so many decks now that have graveyard effects. I mean, you have Voiceless Voice, like they have all their spells and traps that activate from grave. They have Low that tries to trigger from the graveyard. You have decks like Yubel. All the Yubels, when they're destroyed, their effects trigger in the grave when they're destroyed. You also have Snake Eye Fire King, or just pure Snake Eye. You know, Flamberge activates in grave. The Promethean Princess activates in the grave. You have so many graveyard effects in this format that you can easily stop, even against Tenpais, for example. If they try to go the Bident Dragon to special summon, that's a graveyard effect. So you can Skullmeister that if they're in the battle phase, because now, you know, you can actually interact with their cards. So I think Skullmeister has a lot of interesting, unique applications. Now, it might not be the strongest hand trap in this format, but 2 things I want to point out here is that A, it's not only a dark, but it's a fiend, which means in a worst case scenario, if you needed to normal summon this, you could still special summon cards like Grave Squirmer and actually use Skullmeister as like an engine piece to continue making your link plays with, which I thought was cool. Plus, because it's a dark, you can also use Nightmare Pain to destroy it from the hand to get access to your Yubel line in the event that you bricked or whatever, which is a utility that other hand traps like Ash, Ogre don't actually provide this deck. So I thought it was pretty cool. Plus, not to mention that it's not once per turn, so if you do draw multiples of this, you can actually use them in the same turn, which I think is really cool and really valuable, something that I think it's overlooked. It might not be the best hand trap in the format, but it's still definitely usable against almost every matchup you come across. And the fact that it's also a Dark Fiend, I think, plays very heavily into what this deck wants to do. And, you know, being able to not only use it as a non-engine piece, but also as an engine piece in certain scenarios, which I think is great. So, 3 Skullmeisters. Then to round out the last monster is obviously the 1 Unchained Soul of Shavara. This card is just nuts, being like your 4th copy of Grave Squirmer in a way. As a quick effect, you can target a fiend you control, destroy it, and then special Sharv. You just use this to trigger all your Yubel cards, and then when this card's sent from field to graveyard, you can set an Unchained spell trap directly from your deck. So 1 Shavara is nice. Now we're moving into the spells. Again, keep in mind this is a 48 card deck list. And we play that number simply because there's a bunch of stuff in here that we want to mitigate drawing or bricking on. So in testing, I feel like the 48 card number has been perfect for me. I really haven't bricked ever, and it's been flowing really consistently in all the locals that I've gone to. So we have 3 copies of Evil Eye Domain Pareidolia. One of the things I like about the Evil Eye package, similar in the same vein of the Yubel Nightmare Throne package, is that the Nightmare Throne, as we all know, is a 1-card starter. But so is Evil Eye Domain Pareidolia. Like, you have 2 different field spells in this deck that you can pivot between that are effectively just 1-card combos, which is nuts. So on activation, lets you add an Evil Eye monster from deck to hand. Usually always going to be Sergio. It also has another gimmicky effect where during damage calculation, if your Evil Eye monster is attacked while Evil Eye Celine's in the spell trap zone, you can make the battle damage we take also inflicted on the opponent, so we both take the damage. And then if this card is destroyed by any means, we can target an Evil Eye monster in the graveyard and add it to our hand. So really cool recursion effect there, allowing you to keep adding the Sergios back, so you can keep getting follow-up on subsequent turns. So you definitely max out on this as a 3 of. And then here's the reason why I think this deck is so busted, and why the Evil Eye package I think is so good for Yubel specifically, is because of this card, Evil Eye's Unleashed. You can send an Evil Eye monster and an Evil Eye spell trap from deck to grave as cost. So it's a Foolish and a Foolish Burial Goods as cost, and if it resolves, you can add an Evil Eye equip spell from the deck to your hand. But for the rest of this turn, each time you activate a non-Evil Eye card or effect, you lose 500 life. Now, that seems like a bad thing, right? But not if you know how to play this deck and pilot it well. That's one of the things I'll say about this particular list, is that it's not easy to play. It does require a very skilled pilot to work this deck and use all of its benefits to your advantage. One of the things you'll do with Unleashed is you'll hold it in hand for as long as possible, because obviously if you activate it too early in your combo, you'll just start taking 500 damage for every non-Evil Eye card or effect that you use subsequently. So I usually hold this until the very end, once I know that I've exhausted everything I've wanted to do. Then I'll commit to the Unleashed line. And actually, because I play it that way, this card not only helps me play through hand traps, but also even play through stuff like Nibiru or even back row. And I'll explain that. If you guys want to see it combos and test hands, I have no problem showing that to you guys. So leave down in the comments below if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. But what makes this card really awesome is that while it's in the graveyard, if we link summon an Evil Eye Link monster, we can banish this card from our grave and then equip an Evil Eye equip spell from grave to one Evil Eye Link monster we control. So we'll talk about why that's important in a bit, but this card is really, really insane. Like, it's literally just a 1-card combo by itself. This is why I think the Evil Eye cards have so much value, and why playing it in the package with Yubel works so well, because if Sergio does get negated, if we hard opened this already, it literally doesn't even matter. Like, the Sergio was just a bait at that point, because this card is able to push through that hand trap really, really well. Up next, we play 1 copy of Evil Eye Reemergence. This is a spell that we can search through the Evil Eye line, and it just special summons a Evil Eye token to our field. And if we control Celine, we can special summon 2 tokens. However, for the rest of the turn, we're locked into Fiends, but that's really not an issue for this deck. And then from the graveyard, you can banish this card, and for the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot target Evil Eye spells and traps you control with card effects, which is really insane. So it helps protect, like, your Celines from getting outed by certain things. But the token production of this card is really strong, and this is kind of how we're able to play through stuff like Nibiru and other hand traps when our opponents try to shut us down. So a really insane card here. Then we follow that up with double Gorgonale and 1 copy of Evil Eye of Celine. You guys are probably freaking out, especially those of you familiar with Evil Eye, because we're playing just 1 Celine. But honestly, I think Celine's just a brick. As cool of a card as it is, it only works with the Evil Eye stuff. So if you draw Celine, but the rest of your hand is Yubel stuff, Celine doesn't really do anything, and I wanted to mitigate the amount of bricks this deck was playing. So my ratio here is just 2 Gorgonale, 1 Celine. This is the card that the Evil Eye archetype focuses itself around, and it states that it can only be equipped to an Evil Eye monster. That monster cannot be destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effects. Also, your opponent cannot target it with card effects. So it turns all of your Evil Eyes into, like, towers, basically. Just really sticky cards that your opponent's going to have to struggle to deal with. Then, each time you activate the equipped monster's effect or another Evil Eye spell trap, you take 500 damage, and if you do, the equipped monster gains 500 attack. And that attack boost is permanent, even if this leaves the field. Then, it does have a graveyard effect where you can banish an Evil Eye card from grave, pay 1,000 life points, and reset this card from the graveyard. So, really insane. It can just self-recycle, basically. And then, double Gorgonale. It treats itself as Celine while it's on the field. It can only be equipped to an Evil Eye monster. And while it's equipped, if while our life points are lower than our opponents, the equipped monster gains attack equal to the difference. Pretty cool, being able to treat itself as an additional Selene, but the real reason why you play this card is because it's got a really strong graveyard effect, where you can banish yourself from grave, discard an Evil Eye card, and then search for any Evil Eye spell trap from deck to hand. This is, again, another really insane card. Usually what you're sending to the graveyard with your copies of Unleashed, and this is, again, what allows you to push through hand traps and disruption so well, in my opinion. So that wraps up the Evil Eye spells. Now we're going to dive into the Yubel spells, of which we have triple copies of Nightmare Throne. Again, an insane one-card starter. On activation, you can either add to your hand or destroy from deck a Fiend monster with 0 attack and defense. Has an additional effect where if a face-up Yubel monster you control leaves the field by a card effect, you can actually add to your hand a Yubel monster from your deck, graveyard, or banishment whose original level is 1 higher or lower than the destroyed monster, and then you can special summon it ignoring summoning conditions. So really good at just keeping board presence on field and just putting so much pressure on your opponent. Really amazing card, so you definitely want to max out on that in any Yubel variant. Then of course we have the 3 copies of Nightmare Pain. This card shouldn't even need an introduction. It's just a really insane continuous spell that states during your main phase you can destroy a dark monster in your hand or face-up field, and if you do, you can add a Yubel or a card that mentions it from the deck to your hand, except Nightmare Pain. This is what's going to help you cheese wins with the Yubel deck, because while you control this card, monsters your opponent controls must attack Yubel if able. So this card effectively forces them into the battle phase as long as they have monsters that can attack, and they can only attack the Yubel. Which is really insane. And if that wasn't crazy enough, any battle damage that we would take is inflicted to our opponent instead. So not only do the Yubels burn your opponent for the attack of the monster, but then the opponent's also going to take the battle damage. Now you're probably wondering, well, how does that work if Yubel states we take no damage? Well, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Rulings are crazy and you need a PhD to understand them, according to Konami, you would actually take damage before you wouldn't. So in the event that we would be taking battle damage, Nightmare Pain would reflect it, and then Yubel makes it so we don't take any. It's a little confusing, but for those of you who play Yubel understand how this works, obviously. Nightmare Pain is the bread and butter of the entire Yubel deck, and it's the reason why I think the deck is seeing so much success, because it's a pretty annoying card to have to deal with. Then we do play 1 Mature Chronicle. Basically, each time you special summon a Yubel or monster that mentions it, you place a counter on this, and then you can do a bunch of really cool things with those counters. You can pull 1 counter off to special summon a Yubel from grave, the original Yubel. You can pull 2 counters to add one of your banished cards back to your hand. Really cool that you can add some of your banished Evil Eye stuff back. Really interesting there. You can get back like banished Basiltrissus, for example. Pull 3, you can banish a card from deck, never comes up. Pull 4 counters off, you can destroy a card on field non-target, and then the best effect in my opinion, if you pull 5 counters off, you can search Super Polymerization from deck to hand. So really silly card in the deck, really good as a one-of, searchable. Then, because this is a very hand trap heavy format, we're choosing to main deck triple copies of Triple Tactics Talents. This card just puts an insane amount of pressure on your opponent and just punishes them so hard for hand trapping us. I think this card is just really insane as a 3-of in this deck. Definitely would never consider cutting it. Then up next, we have 1 Super Poly in the main deck. I've seen a lot of lists talk about, maxing out on this or playing 2. To be honest, I think Super Poly's better suited at, playing additional copies in the side. You only need to main deck the 1. It's not a starter or an extender. So, sometimes this card can be a garnet, especially if you don't have things you can poly with. So I cut this to a 1-of, and I haven't regretted it since. I do play 2 additional copies in the side, so when we know we're going second, we could try to break the board that way, but I think main decking 1 is perfectly fine in my opinion. And then, of course, we have the 1 Terraforming. Since we do have 2 different field spells we can search in this deck, Terraforming just becomes an insane 1-card starter as well. That rounds out the spells. Now for the traps, we are on 3 Infinite Impermanence as an additional hand trap of choice for this deck list. And then for the remaining traps we play, again, this is a 48-card deck. We have 1 Abominable Chamber of the Unchained. This is what we're setting off the Shavara, and this just allows us to recover Unchained monsters from our graveyard, kind of like a Monster Reborn. We play the 1 Evil Eye Retribution, which is a spell trap negate while you control an Evil Eye monster. This is what makes it so that Yubel doesn't lose to stuff like Evenly Matched and Lightning Storm. So really insane that the fact that playing the Evil Eye package allows you to get access to a spell Trap Negate, something that Evil Eye doesn't, or something that Yubel currently doesn't have access to. And then for the last card in the main is one Eternal Favorite. Again, another really insanely searchable card, also functioning as a Monster Reborn of sorts and or a Super Poly as well. So that rounds out the 48 card main deck. Now we're going to dive headfirst into the extra deck, of which we played 2 copies of the beautiful Loving Defender Forever. We're on 2 of this because Kashtira is a thing this format, including like Kashtira Snake Eye variants. And, you know, if they use Unicorn to look at your extra deck, they're without a doubt ripping this out every single time. So you want to make sure you do have a second copy at least to be able to still Super Poly their board. And these are the only Super Poly targets I'm choosing to run. I'm not, like the extra deck's already kind of tight as is, and I felt like playing the additional Poly targets like Garua, Muddragon, sometimes they don't even come up half the time, nor do they even feel that great. Like, I feel like most Snake Eye builds can still push through a Super Poly a lot of the time, at least from my experience. So all we really need is just Loving Defender. You know, once you establish a Yubel of any form on your field, which is not hard to do, as long as you have any Super Polys, you can just poly their entire field just to make this, which I think is super crucial. So 2 copies of Loving Defender. Then for our rank 10s, we have 1 Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max, which can help you cheese wins. 1 Varutus, the final bringer of the end times, a new release out of Legacy of Destruction. Basically one of the only remaining Omni Negates in this format since the ban of Baron and Savage. Really crazy Xyz monster here. And then we round out the Xyz package with 1 Superstar Slayer Typhon Sky Crisis, who just so happens to be a Fiend monster. So even if we're Fiend locked, we can still actually go into this card and use it to break the board when going second. Then for our links, 2 copies of Gorgon, Empress of the Evil Eye, one of the most beautiful Link 2 monsters I think I've ever seen in my life. Really cool card, basically Effect Veiler on legs while it's equipped with Selene. And then during the next standby phase, again, remember the Evil Eyes have like this punishment kind of effect that triggers on the next standby mandatorily if you use their effects while equipped. And her effect is, during the standby phase, she can destroy a monster she points to. Now you can set this up where you can actually summon Yubels or spirits to the zone she points to purposely use her negative effect to proc advantage off of it, which I think is really crazy. So 2 Gorgons is really cool for this deck. Just being, you know, able to put that kind of pressure on your opponent. 1 Muckraker from the Underworld, pretty self-explanatory, just an insane like Fiend Link extender. 1 SP Little Knight for the Yubel line, or I'm sorry, for the Unchained line, which we are playing. 1 Blue Dog, Soul of Rage. You know, using him to quick link with your opponent's stuff is really crazy. Also, the fact that he can float upon destruction into any fiend from grave to hand is nice. 1 Unchained Soul, Lord of Yama. The fact that this card's generic is just so silly. Again, this is why we play the Surziel and the Triple Squirmer, because we can even pivot into our Unchained line if we don't want to go for the Gorgon play. So the Yama's really here for that. We still play the Nightmare Unicorn, even though we're also on SP, because there's certain scenarios where, like, you'll burn SP. Spoiler, we're also playing Anguish. Sometimes you'll go Anguish into, like, you'll link down into an SP, but then what happens is that you won't have anything to link with Soul of Rage if you use the SP early. If the duel turns into a grind and you make Soul of Rage later in the game, Soul of Rage doesn't have anything to link with. So that's why we play the SP and the Unicorn, just to give the Rage an additional target to use if we ended up making SP with Anguish instead, which I think is cool. And then we obviously play 1 copy of Zurziel, Ruler of the Evil Eye, another really insane Link 3, basically while it's equipped with Selene. He can quick effect target any card in the field and destroy it. And then as a punishment-like effect, on the next standby, he negates the effect of a monster he points to. Mandatory as well. Really insane Link 3 though. Again, this Evil Eye stuff I feel puts so much pressure on your opponent, and a lot of decks just don't have outs to it, especially since these cards can't be targeted or be destroyed once they're equipped. And then for the last extra deck card we do play is the 1 Unchained Abomination. Really crazy in this deck. Now, moving on to the side deck before we wrap things up. I know this video is a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. We have 3 copies of Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. Now, the reason why I'm playing this is because I'm specifically using an Evil Eye variant of Yubel. And like I said, the Selene will make you lose 500 life points each time you use the equipped monster's effects. So this is a way for us to mitigate that cost, especially as we get closer to time. Just being able to keep our life points, you know, higher than our opponent is important, and to make sure that our own Selene doesn't actually kill us. So that's why I'm choosing to play the Ghost Sister. I think if you're playing pure Yubel, this is not needed in the slightest. Then we do side deck 3 Ogre, because Ogre just is really strong in this format. I mean, I know we're not main decking it, we're choosing to main deck the Skullmeister, but you know, if we need to side into ogres, we do have them in the side. Then we also play 2 super polys in the side. Again, like I said, if we know we're going second, I'll board into these 2 to make it so we have a playset in the main, which is really crazy. 2 copies of the Dark World Puppetry, a really cool quick play spell that is basically like a Called by the Grave, or no, more like a DD Crow for 3. It allows you to target 3 cards in any graveyards and banish them, and then you discard a Fiend monster. It can also banish itself to target a banished Fiend and add it to hand, which is really cool. And then we also play, in the side is 2 copies of Thrust. Really good for when you know you're going to go second. I think siding into Thrust going second is huge, because if you're going first, Thrust is just okay, at least in this deck, because the only searchable target you'd have is the Imperm. You'd have to set it. There's nothing else that you could like set that gives you that much value. But if you're going second, if your opponent controls the monster, you can add those cards to hand, and because we're playing an Evil Eye variant, Thrust has a lot of things to search. Like Evil Eye's Unleashed, you can search Terraforming, and that gets you access to either your Yubel line or your Evil Eye line. You have just tons of really cool things to search for, which I think is cool. Then speaking of Evil Eyes, another reason why we play this is because in the side we have 1 copy of Confrontation. This is a quick play Mystical Space Typhoon, or if we control Selene, it's a Cosmic Cyclone instead. But because it's Evil Eye in name, it's actually searchable back row removal, which I like. And then we also play the 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, again searchable through Thrust, if we know we're going to be going second. And then to round out the last card on the side is 1 Evil Eye Defeat, for when we know we're going first. This is a really cool card you can either search with Surzeal, or off of you can set it off of a Thrust, assuming you sided Thrust for going first. This card is basically a compulsory evacuation device, but if you control Selene, it's a double compulse. So it gives some really cool non-destruction removal for the deck, which I really like. But that's going to wrap up my 48 card Yubel Evil Eye deck profile for the post Legacy Destruction format. Let me know down in the comments below if you guys want to see combos and test hands with this deck. Like I said, I took it to 4 locals recently, and it's done extremely well. The last locals I've actually ended up taking second place with this particular deck list. It's definitely catching people off guard because, like I said, no one else is playing Evil Eyes in Yubel. And to be fair, I'm not really sure why. I mean, you could argue that maybe it hurts consistency, sure, but I think the benefits you give outweigh the cons. And plus, it's just really cool. I mean, I'm not saying this is the most competitive version of Yubel, but it certainly is the most fun in my opinion. I think the Evil Eyes pack one heck of a punch, and they definitely shouldn't be understated. So with that being said, guys, like the video, comment down below what your thoughts are, and subscribe if you haven't already. But with that being said, this is Nick, hitting that end phase. Peace.